Chapter 1: Shadows of the Past. The rain incessantly beat against the office windows, creating a hypnotic sound that filled the room with a melancholic melody. Detective Marco Santini, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a face marked by years of investigation, sat in his worn leather chair. A faint light from the desk lamp illuminated the pile of papers, files, and photographs scattered before him. Marco had an aura of mystery about him. His colleagues in the police department whispered about his past, but few knew the truth. He was a man who carried with him the ghosts of unsolved cases, irreparable losses, and decisions that still haunted his sleepless nights. On that rainy afternoon, as Marco watched the cigarette smoke dance in the air, his office door opened. An elegant figure entered, her face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. She was Sarah Blake, a private investigator who sometimes collaborated with Marco on more complex cases. Her green eyes shone with a mix of determination and restlessness. "Marco, we have a case," said Sarah, throwing a brown envelope on his desk. "A young woman named Emily Turner is missing. The last place she was seen was at the old abandoned theater on 42nd Street. Marco picked up the envelope and began to examine the photos and documents inside. The images showed a young woman with dark hair and an innocent expression. He looked at Sarah, his eyebrows furrowed in concern. "What else do we know about her?" Marco asked, lighting another cigarette and offering one to Sarah, who declined with a subtle gesture. "Not much. Emily worked as an assistant in a local library. No known enemies, quiet life. But something tells me there's more to this story," replied Sarah, crossing her arms as she watched Marco analyze the clues. Marco stood up, grabbing his overcoat and hat. He knew that the first rule of a good investigation was to start at the last place the victim was seen. As they left the office, the rain seemed to intensify, as if the sky was anticipating what was to come. At the abandoned theater, the air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. Shadows danced on the walls as Marco and Sarah explored the place with flashlights. The silence was disturbing, interrupted only by the sound of water droplets falling from the ruined ceiling. "Here, look at this," called Sarah, pointing to a faded mural covered with old advertisements and newspaper clippings. There was a handwritten message in red ink. "The game has begun. Decipher the code or face the consequences." Marco frowned, feeling a chill run down his spine. He knew they were dealing with something much more complex than a simple disappearance. As he stepped away from the mural, something gleamed on the floor. He crouched and picked up a small folded piece of paper. Upon opening it, he found a series of seemingly random numbers and letters. "Looks like we have a code to decipher," said Marco, showing the paper to Sarah. Sarah nodded, her gaze narrowing with determination. "And we have little time. If Emily is still alive, we need to figure out what this means quickly." With the sound of rain and thunder in the background, Marco and Sarah knew they were just beginning to unravel the dark secrets surrounding Emily Turner's disappearance. And the clock was ticking against them. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Theater. The abandoned theater on 42nd Street was a monument to the glamour of a bygone era, now shrouded in decay and mystery. Marco and Sarah moved through the shadowy lobby, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The sound of rain outside seemed a distant whisper, almost inaudible within the building's thick walls. "This place has seen better days," murmured Marco, as his flashlight illuminated rows of dusty seats and the deserted stage. "Why would anyone choose to meet here?" Sarah observed carefully, her keen eyes picking up details that would pass unnoticed by less trained eyes. "Maybe it's a matter of symbolism. The theater is a stage for illusions and secrets, perfect for someone who wants to stay hidden." Marco silently agreed. The air was heavy with humidity and a sense of impending danger. They climbed onto the stage where the boards creaked under their feet. Marco raised his flashlight, revealing faded curtains and a deteriorated set from a long-forgotten play. In the center of the stage, they found an old suitcase. Sarah knelt and carefully opened it, revealing a collection of curious objects. Old photos, a leather-bound diary, and a ring with an enigmatic inscription. Marco picked up the diary and began flipping through it, stopping on a page that contained the same sequence of numbers and letters they had found earlier. "This code is everywhere," said Marco, turning the diary so Sarah could see. "We need to figure out what it means." Sarah examined the inscription on the ring, her fingers sliding over the engraved letters. "This is Latin, Marco.
Veritas vos librabi.
The truth will set you free." "Seems like someone wants to leave us clues," said Marco, closing the diary. "But what's the endgame here?" Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the theater. Marco and Sarah exchanged a look of alertness, their hands instinctively moving to their weapons. A tall, slender man emerged from the shadows, his face hidden by a hood. "Looking for answers, detective?" said the figure, his voice smooth as silk. "Perhaps I can help, if you're willing to pay the price." Marco remained calm, though his heart was racing. "Who are you? And what do you know about Emily Turner?" "I'm just a messenger," said the man, approaching slowly. "Emily is involved in something much bigger than you realize. Decipher the code, and you'll discover the truth. But be careful, detective. Some secrets are better left buried." Before Marco or Sarah could react, the man disappeared into the shadows, leaving them alone on the empty stage. Marco felt the pressure mounting. Time was running out, and the answers remained elusive. "We have to crack this code soon," said Sarah, putting the ring in her pocket. "Emily's life could depend on it." Marco nodded, knowing that the truth was closer than ever, but also more dangerous. They left the theater with a renewed sense of urgency, determined to follow every clue to the end. Chapter 3: The Code Enigma. Back at the office, Marco and Sarah were immersed in books and documents, trying to decipher the enigmatic code that seemed to be the key to finding Emily Turner. The rain continued to fall outside, creating an ideal atmosphere for the growing tension inside the room. Marco was hunched over a large whiteboard, where he had written down the sequence of numbers and letters. He knew the solution wasn't simple and that every lost minute could cost Emily her life. "This code is different from anything we've seen before," said Sarah, adjusting her glasses as she analyzed a cryptography book. "It could be a combination of several encoding techniques." Marco nodded, rubbing his temple in frustration. "What if we try combining it with the clues we found at the theater? The diary, the ring, and even the Latin motto." Sarah perked up at the idea. "Right, let's start with the diary. There's something peculiar about the dates and events mentioned. There might be a pattern we haven't noticed." They spent hours cross-referencing information, drawing parallels between the diary entries and the ring's inscriptions. As the night wore on and exhaustion set in, Marco had an epiphany. "Wait, what if the code is a complex substitution cipher?" he said, grabbing a sheet of paper and starting to scribble frantically. "The letters and numbers might be substituting whole words or phrases." Sarah watched as Marco worked, his sharp mind connecting the dots. Gradually, the code began to reveal itself. "It's working, Marco," said Sarah, excited. "We're getting there." Finally, after hours of intense work, the code was deciphered. The result was a clear but terrifying message. "The theater hides more than memories. Search the basement, where secrets are buried." Marco felt a chill run down his spine. "It looks like our next step is to go back to the theater. We need to find out what's hidden down there." Sarah agreed, but there was evident concern in her eyes. We need to be careful. If what we've found so far is any indication, the basement could be dangerous. With the message deciphered, they prepared to return to the theater. Time was running out and every second counted. Marco and Sarah knew they were getting closer to the truth, but also to imminent danger. Chapter 4: The Dark Basement. Marco and Sarah arrived at the theater in the dead of night, the full moon casting ghostly shadows over the crumbling facade. The main door creaked as they opened it, and the cold, damp air inside enveloped them immediately. The flashlights in their hands cut through the darkness, revealing the path to the basement they needed to explore. If the code was right, we should find something important down there, Marco said, his grave tone echoing through the empty theater. Sarah nodded, gripping her flashlight tightly. We need to be ready for anything. We don't know what awaits us. They carefully walked across the stage and found the entrance to the basement, an old, worn wooden door. Marco pushed it open with force, and the rusty hinges protested before giving way. A steep staircase descended into the darkness, and the air was even denser and colder, laden with the smell of mold and something more indefinable, something sinister. "Stay behind me," Marco said, starting down the stairs. Sarah followed, their steps echoing in the void. Below, the basement was a cavern of concrete and shadows. The walls were coated with moss and moisture, and the floor was strewn with debris. In the center of the room stood an old table covered with a dirty tarp. Around it, rusted metal shelves held a collection of ancient objects and dusty boxes. "Let's check out that table," Marco suggested, walking over and pulling off the tarp. Beneath it, they found a collection of old documents, maps, and a metal safe. Marco tried to open the safe, but it was locked. "We need a combination to open this," Marco said, frustrated. Sarah was examining the documents when she found something intriguing. "Look at this, Marco. It's a map of the theater. And here, there's a special marking in the basement." They followed the map's indication and discovered a false wall. Marco pressed against it, and the wall opened with a creak, revealing a secret compartment. Inside was a small wooden box. "Here it is," Sarah said, opening the box carefully. Inside, they found an old key and an envelope sealed with red wax. Marco opened the envelope, revealing a handwritten letter. The letter was a confession from a former theater manager, describing a conspiracy to conceal compromising secrets of the local elite. Emily Turner had discovered these secrets, which was why she was abducted. That explains her disappearance. Emily was investigating something dangerous, Sarah said, feeling the gravity of the situation. Marco took the key and approached the safe. He inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The safe opened with a click, revealing a collection of incriminating documents and a photograph of Emily, bound and gagged in an unknown location. "We need to find her, and fast," Marco said with renewed determination. "Now we know she's alive, but we don't know for how long." With the new information in hand, Marco and Sarah left the basement, ready to face anything to save Emily and expose the dark secrets they had uncovered. Chapter 5: The Trap. Back at the office, Marco and Sarah were immersed in the newly discovered information. The incriminating documents revealed a complex web of corruption involving powerful figures in the city. Among them, one name stood out: Jonathan Blake, an influential magnate and Sarah's distant cousin. "This can't be a coincidence," Sarah said, looking at the photograph of Emily. "Jonathan has always had shady dealings, but I never imagined it would come to this." "We need to confront him," Marco replied, his voice firm, "but carefully. If he knows we're close, Emily could be in even greater danger." They planned a careful encounter, deciding that Sarah would make a casual visit to Jonathan, while Marco infiltrated the property to search for Emily. The next morning, Sarah entered Jonathan's mansion, where she was greeted with a warm smile. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise," Jonathan said, hugging her. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk, Jonathan." "About family business," Sarah said, trying to hide the tension in her voice. Meanwhile, Marco skirted the property, moving through the shadows. He found a side entrance and slipped in quietly, following his instincts and the layout Sarah had provided. Inside, he navigated the opulent corridors until he found a locked basement door. With the skill of an experienced detective, he managed to unlock it and descended. The mansion's basement was surprisingly modern, with secure rooms and surveillance cameras. Marco found a room at the back where he saw Emily tied to a chair, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. Marco rushed to her, removing the gag. "Emily, we're getting you out of here," Marco whispered, starting to untie the ropes. Suddenly, an alarm sounded, echoing through the basement. Marco knew they had little time before the guards arrived. He took Emily by the hand and guided her out, the two of them running through the corridors to an emergency exit. Upstairs, Jonathan realized what was happening, and his smile disappeared. He looked at Sarah with a mix of anger and disappointment. "You should never have gotten involved, Sarah," Jonathan said, his voice icy. "Now everyone will pay the price." Sarah maintained her composure, knowing that Marco and Emily needed every second she could buy. "Never underestimate the power of the truth, Jonathan. It always comes to light," Sarah replied, resolute. Marco and Emily managed to escape the mansion, getting into Sarah's car parked nearby. When Sarah finally exited, she was able to evade capture and reunite with Marco and Emily safely. "We did it," Marco said as the car sped away. "But this is far from over. We need to expose Jonathan and ensure everyone involved is brought to justice." Sarah looked at Emily, now safe in the back seat. "We'll make sure the truth prevails. Together." Chapter 6. Deadly Twist. Marco and Sarah knew the next step would be crucial. Back at the office, they gathered all the incriminating evidence they had found. Emily, still recovering from the trauma, provided additional details that could help bring down Jonathan Blake and his corrupt network. "We need to get this to the press and the authorities," Sarah said, her gaze determined. "It's the only way to ensure they don't escape." Marco agreed, but his instincts told him Jonathan wouldn't stand idle. "We need to be fast and careful. Jonathan will try to stop us." That night, while Sarah and Emily prepared to meet with a trusted journalist, Marco stayed in the office organizing the documents. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Marco Santini," he answered, feeling a chill. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost seductive. "Detective Santini, you're getting yourself into something dangerous. Jonathan Blake is not someone to underestimate. I suggest you back off while you can." Marco gripped the phone tighter. "Who are you? And why are you warning me?" "Let's say I'm someone interested in seeing the truth come out, but without unnecessary bloodshed. Jonathan is already on his way to your office. Be careful." The call ended abruptly. Marco felt a shiver run down his spine. He quickly called Sarah. "Sarah, you need to get out of there now. Jonathan is coming after us." Sarah didn't hesitate. She and Emily hurried out, heading to a safe location. Meanwhile, Marco began preparing the office, hiding copies of the documents in strategic places. It wasn't long before he heard heavy footsteps in the corridor. The office door burst open, and Jonathan Blake entered, flanked by two armed thugs. His smile was cold, calculated. "Good evening, Detective. It seems you've gotten yourself into something you shouldn't have," Jonathan said, advancing slowly. Marco remained calm, even with the imminent threat. The truth will come out, Jonathan. You can't stop it. Jonathan laughed, an empty and sinister sound. We'll see about that. Where are the documents? Marco knew his life was in danger, but he was determined to protect the evidence. He fought the thugs using all his skill and experience. The struggle was intense, but Marco managed to disarm and immobilize them. Jonathan, realizing he was at a disadvantage, retreated. This isn't over, Santini. Marco, panting, looked at Jonathan with cold eyes. No, it's not. And I'll make sure you pay for everything. Jonathan fled, but Marco knew the battle was far from over. He needed to ensure Sarah and Emily were safe and that the evidence reached the right hands. In the safety of a secure location, Sarah and Emily met with the journalist, handing over the documents and recounting their ordeal. The journalist, an old friend and trusted ally, assured them the story would be published, and the authorities would be informed. We need to be prepared for a backlash, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tension. We will be, the journalist replied. But this is too big to ignore. People need to know the truth. Marco soon joined them, bringing additional evidence and his own testimony. Together, they outlined a plan to expose Jonathan Blake and dismantle his network of corruption. We're in this together, Marco said, looking at Sarah and Emily. And we won't stop until justice is served. The days that followed were a whirlwind of media coverage and police action. Jonathan Blake's empire began to crumble as more people came forward with their stories. The authorities launched an investigation, and warrants were issued for Jonathan and his associates. Despite the danger, Marco, Sarah, and Emily stood firm. They knew the fight wasn't over, but they were ready to face whatever came next, united by their determination to see justice prevail. Late one night, as the rain poured down, Marco received another call from the unknown number. The same smooth voice spoke. Detective, you've done well. But remember, the game isn't over. There are still pieces in play. Marco listened, his resolve unwavering. We'll be ready, and we won't stop until every piece is accounted for. The call ended, and Marco felt a sense of calm. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but he knew they had the strength and courage to see it through. Together, they would uncover every secret, expose every lie, and ensure that justice was served. Chapter 7: The Net Tightens. Sarah and Emily found refuge in the home of a trusted journalist, Robert Hayes. Robert was a veteran of the press, known for his integrity and courage in exposing the truth, regardless of the consequences. His house, a fortress of confidential information, became the perfect hideout. Marco, still panting from the fight, drove quickly to the hideout. The rain fell heavily, but he didn't slow down. He knew Jonathan wouldn't give up easily. When he arrived, he was greeted by Sarah, who was visibly relieved to see him. Are you okay? Sarah asked, giving him a quick hug. I'm fine. But Jonathan is still out there and he's dangerous. We need to act fast, Marco replied, his voice firm. Inside the house, Emily was sitting next to Robert, reviewing the documents they had brought. Robert stood up when he saw Marco, his expression determined. We have everything we need to expose Jonathan and his network. But we need to ensure that this information reaches the public safely, Robert said.
Marco nodded.
We have to be strategic. Jonathan has eyes and ears everywhere. We need a plan to release this without him silencing us. For hours, they discussed the plan. They decided the best approach would be a live broadcast, making it impossible for any attempt at interception before the information spread. Robert activated his contacts, preparing everything for the broadcast. As night fell, the tension in the house was palpable. Emily was nervous but determined. Sarah and Marco took turns watching the house, alert to any sign of danger. Finally, everything was ready for the broadcast. Robert adjusted the camera, and the transmission began. Good evening, citizens. This is an urgent and highly important message. What you are about to see and hear are irrefutable proofs of a network of corruption and crime that reaches the top of our society. As Robert spoke, Marco, Sarah, and Emily watched closely. Suddenly, a loud noise came from the entrance. The door was kicked open, and Jonathan Blake entered, followed by more armed thugs. "Stop that broadcast now," Jonathan shouted, his voice full of rage. Marco and Sarah reacted quickly, trying to protect Robert and Emily. A fierce fight ensued, but this time, Marco and Sarah were prepared. Using every bit of their skill and courage, they managed to neutralize the thugs. Jonathan, realizing he was defeated, tried to escape. Marco caught up with him, grabbing him by the collar. "It's over, Jonathan. You're going to pay for everything," Marco said, looking directly into his eyes. Jonathan was handcuffed and taken away by the authorities who arrived shortly after, alerted by Robert. The broadcast continued, and the evidence was revealed to the public. With Jonathan arrested and the network dismantled, the city began to breathe easier. Sarah, Marco, and Emily knew the battle was won, but the fight for justice continued. In the days that followed, the story of Jonathan Blake's corruption spread like wildfire. The city was in uproar as more people came forward with their own tales of exploitation and deceit. The authorities launched a full-scale investigation, leading to more arrests and the unraveling of Jonathan's extensive network. Marco, Sarah, and Emily were hailed as heroes, but they remained focused on their mission. They knew that true justice required vigilance and persistence. One evening, as they sat together in Robert's living room, Marco reflected on their journey. "We've come a long way, but we can't let our guard down. There are still many who believe they're above the law," Marco said. Sarah nodded. "We've shown that the truth can prevail. Now we need to keep pushing forward, ensuring that justice is served for everyone." Emily, still recovering but stronger every day, added, "What we've done here is just the beginning. There are so many more out there who need our help." Robert, ever the vigilant journalist, smiled. "And we'll be here to tell their stories. Together we can make a difference." As the rain continued to fall outside, the group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had faced danger and corruption head-on and emerged victorious. But they knew their work was far from over. In the dim light of Robert's living room, they began to plan their next steps, united by their shared commitment to justice and truth. Chapter 8: Revelations and Consequences. Robert's live broadcast had a huge impact. The evidence presented was enough to launch a large-scale investigation against Jonathan Blake and his network of accomplices. The city was in shock but also relieved to finally see justice being done. Marco, Sarah, and Emily spent the following days working with the authorities, ensuring that all the details were properly recorded. Emily, now more secure and confident, was crucial in providing detailed information about her discoveries and what she had witnessed. At one point, while in Robert's office, Emily turned to Marco and Sarah. "I couldn't have done it without you. You saved me and brought the truth to light. I will be eternally grateful," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Sarah smiled and hugged Emily. "We are in this together. The truth is a powerful force, and together we managed to expose the lies and corruption." Marco, always the pragmatist, nodded. "We still have work to do, but today, we can be proud of what we have achieved." As the weeks passed, the city began to adjust to the new reality. Influential figures were toppled, and new hope began to emerge. Jonathan Blake was formally charged with multiple crimes and awaited trial, while his accomplices tried to negotiate deals to reduce their sentences. On a sunny day, Marco, Sarah, and Emily met for coffee in a tranquil spot in the city. It was a moment of reflection and recovery after the storm they had faced. "So, what's next?" Emily asked, looking at the two detectives.
Marco shrugged.
"We keep doing what we do best. The city still has many secrets, and there are more truths to uncover." Sarah smiled. "And we'll face every challenge together. Justice doesn't take a holiday." Emily laughed softly, feeling stronger and more resilient. "I'm ready for whatever comes. I've learned so much from you, and I know I can make a difference." As the sun set, bathing the city in a golden glow, Marco, Sarah, and Emily felt a sense of accomplishment and renewed purpose. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were prepared to face any challenge together. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. Despite Jonathan Blake being in custody, Marco knew that dismantling the corruption network wouldn't be easy. There were other powerful figures involved, and the remnants of the conspiracy still lurked in the shadows. He and Sarah were determined to take down the entire operation. One night, while reviewing the documents in the office, Marco received an anonymous message. The message contained a location and a warning. "Find the truth before it's too late." "This looks like a trap," Sarah said, frowning as she looked at the message.
Marco nodded thoughtfully.
"It could be, but it could also be our chance to end this once and for all. We need to be prepared." They devised a meticulous plan and headed to the indicated location, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The atmosphere was tense, with a cold wind cutting through the air and the full moon illuminating the dark sky. As they entered the warehouse, they were greeted by the sound of echoing footsteps. The figure of a man emerged from the shadows, one of Jonathan's key accomplices, a corrupt businessman named Victor Lang. "Detective Santini, Sarah Blake." "Finally, we meet," Victor said, a malicious smile on his face. "I was expecting you." Marco and Sarah drew their guns, remaining vigilant for any movement. "It's over, Victor. Surrender and spare more suffering." Victor laughed, a cold and sinister sound. "Do you think you can end all this? You're just scratching the surface." Suddenly, more men emerged from the shadows, armed and ready to fight. The warehouse turned into a battlefield, with gunfire and shouts echoing all around. Marco and Sarah fought with courage and determination, using every trick they knew. The battle was intense and fierce, but gradually, they managed to take down Victor's henchmen. Finally, Victor was left alone, cornered. "It's the end of the line, Victor," Marco said, advancing cautiously. Victor, realizing he had no way out, raised his hands in surrender. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." Sarah handcuffed Victor while Marco searched the warehouse, finding more documents and evidence incriminating the remaining members of the corrupt network. With Victor in custody, they knew they had dealt a significant blow to the criminal operation. Back at the office, as the sun rose, Marco and Sarah felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. The fight had been arduous, but it was worth it. "We made a difference, Marco," Sarah said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We stopped an evil that was plaguing this city." Marco nodded, a slight smile on his lips. "And we'll keep fighting, Sarah. Always." With Victor Lang's arrest and the incriminating evidence they had gathered, Marco and Sarah worked tirelessly with the authorities to ensure that the remaining figures involved in the corruption network were brought to justice. The city's citizens began to feel a sense of hope and relief, knowing that the people who had exploited and harmed them were being held accountable. Emily, now fully recovered and stronger than ever, joined Marco and Sarah in their mission. Her insights and experiences added valuable perspectives to their investigations, making their team even more formidable. One evening, as they sat together in their office, Marco reflected on the journey they had taken. "We've come a long way," he said, "but we can't let our guard down. There are still many secrets in this city, and more truths to uncover." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We've shown that we can make a difference. Now we need to continue our work, ensuring justice for all." Emily, feeling empowered and ready to take on new challenges, added, "I'm ready for whatever comes next. Together we can face anything." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city, Marco, Sarah, and Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were prepared to confront any challenge that came their way. United by their commitment to truth and justice, they were determined to uncover every secret, expose every lie, and ensure that justice prevailed for all. Chapter 10: The Dawn of Justice. With Victor Lang in custody and his network of accomplices being dismantled, the city finally began to breathe a sigh of relief. Marco and Sarah's investigation had exposed a web of corruption that many believed untouchable. The impact of their revelations echoed throughout the city, bringing a sense of renewal and hope. In the days that followed, Marco, Sarah, and Emily worked tirelessly to ensure that all the evidence was properly documented and handed over to the authorities. Emily, now a key witness, received protection while collaborating with justice. On a sunny morning, Marco and Sarah were invited to a press conference in the city center. The square was packed with journalists and citizens eager to express their gratitude and support for the detectives who had risked everything to expose the truth. Robert Hayes, the journalist who had helped broadcast the story, stepped onto the stage and began to speak. "Today, we celebrate the courage and dedication of two people who not only did their job, but also risked their lives to ensure justice prevailed. Please welcome detectives Marco Santini and Sarah Blake to the stage." Thunderous applause echoed through the square as Marco and Sarah stepped onto the stage. Marco, always modest, waved to the crowd before approaching the microphone. "This investigation was not just about exposing corruption," Marco began, his voice firm. "It was about protecting the innocent and ensuring the truth was heard. Justice is not a reward but a right, and we are here to ensure that everyone receives that right." Sarah, emotional, took the microphone next. "This city deserves to know the truth and live without fear. Each of you played an important role by supporting our efforts, and together, we can continue to fight for a fairer future." The crowd erupted in applause again. Among the faces in the crowd, Marco saw Emily, smiling with pride. He knew that despite the challenges, they had made a difference. After the press conference, Marco and Sarah met with Emily at a nearby cafe. The atmosphere was peaceful, with the sun bathing the city in a golden light. "It's been a long journey, but we did it," Emily said, raising her coffee cup in an impromptu toast. "We did, but the fight continues," Marco replied, his gaze determined. "There will always be new threats, new challenges. But now we know we can overcome them together." Sarah smiled. "And with people like you by our side, we're ready for anything." As they toasted to the future, Marco knew that this victory was just the beginning. There were many untold stories, many mysteries to solve. But for now, he allowed himself to enjoy the moment, surrounded by friends and the sense of a mission accomplished. Justice had prevailed, and with it, a new dawn for the city.